And we're very honored to have Mike here with us today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure, and I really appreciate Jenny inviting me today to talk about this concept of the future. What a great room. Isn't this such a nice intimate room? You know, let's just look at that word, the future. The future. We use it so frequently, but what does it really mean? When I sat, and I'm looking at your ages, approximately where you are when I graduated in college, the year was 1968. Too many years ago to even think about. But 45 years ago, where I was sitting looking at the future of my life, with the furthest stretch of my imagination, I could not envision the world of today, the world that I live my life in. I was graduating college in a world where there were no computers. They were in their infancy, and the computers that we had took up a whole room and used tape and punch cards to try to process things. There was a world of no ATM machines, no internet. TV was black and white with 3 or 4 stations on it. World travel was something that very few people did. Vietnam was going on. The women's movement, the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement were all just started. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I sat there in 1968 and I looked at the future. My vision of the future was really just a progression of what I saw in these 20 years that I had lived and what I thought would be my life. And boy, was I amazed as we sit here today now in 2014, the 21st century, and look back at the changes that I saw evolve in my life. And I challenge you because I said that your life will be the same thing. I want you to project yourself 45 years into your future. What will the year be? We'll be close to the year 2060. Get that? I think, can you conceive that? 2060. And the world that you will see in 2060 will be so incredibly different than you're sitting here today that you can't even imagine it. I guarantee you can't even imagine it. But you know what? There are things that are in place today that are starting to shape that future world of yours. And when you look at that and you think about your lives as they will evolve into the future, I think one of the best pieces of advice that I could give is that you got to be conscious of these things and understand these forces that will create your future world and try to understand them and react to them, to live your life understanding what those forces are, because if you don't, what you wind up becoming is a victim to them rather than trying to take hold of them and trying to leverage them and create the world that you want to see. So we thought it would be useful today to talk about at least what I see as the forces that are going to be shaping your future world. The forces that I see in play today that will dramatically, not in a lateral fashion, but in a fashion that will dramatically impact and change the world that you will see in 2060 as you look back on your lives. And I think there are 5 of them. And I'd just like to spend a few minutes on each one of them. So the first one is technology. Now we've all seen the changes in technology. Like I said, when I was sitting where you were, computers didn't even exist. In fact, when I started working in financial services down in this area here, and I started in technology, my first assignment was to computerize, I want you to understand this, to automate the general ledger of Chase Manhattan Bank, now JP Morgan Chase. To automate it, they were doing their general ledger on computer cards, on ledger cards. Think about that, 1968, ledger cards, a bank like Chase Manhattan. When I went up, I was the CIO of Columbia University in the early 90s. When I went up to Columbia University to take over that job, coming from financial services, they introduced me to something I had never heard of. As a matter of fact, no one heard of it, because it was something that was being used only by research universities to communicate across universities. This is 1991, not so long ago, 1991. That thing that they introduced me to that no one had ever heard of was called the internet. And if you think just back maybe 10 years ago, even less, how social media has changed the world. If I was teaching a course in advertising 10 years ago, I wouldn't even mention social networking. Now if I'm teaching a course in advertising, it's all about social networking. How dramatically technology has changed. But I promise to you that the changes that technology are making on the world are only just beginning. They're only just beginning. How many of you have heard of this concept called the singularity? Anyone? Great, a couple of you. Singularity, correct me if I'm wrong, is a point in time where computer experts have forecasts, and I want you to think about what I'm going to say here now, where computers will outthink humans. We've always defined humans and our ability to define ourselves as humans as a thinking entity, the thinking entity. Now, what happens when machines could outthink us? In fact, the projections are that somewhere around the middle point of this century, well within your lifetimes, that computers will be doing most of the jobs that we currently define today as jobs. So what will it mean in the future when computers are taking over what we consider today to be our normal professional lives, and even in our entertainment lives and our social lives? What does it mean to be a human being in your future world when machines are outthinking you as a person? So are you ready to live in a world where we have a redefinition of what humanity is? And what challenges does that present, and what opportunities does that present as technology moves into the future? So technology is the first one. The second one, the global economy. The global economy. When I started, again, I'll go back to one of my first jobs in my professional world was with Chase Manhattan, as I said. When we were dealing with Chase Manhattan, which was one of the biggest banks in the United States at that point in time, international business was something that was very difficult to do. We were using maybe telexes and what's the cable and cable, not cable TV, but cable phones. And the extent of global business was very small. Matter of fact, if you looked at the amount of business that Chase Manhattan was doing, Chase Manhattan back in those days was maybe a $300 million corporation. Now it's in the trillions as far as deposits and assets, and global business is something that they do naturally. But what's the impact of this global economy that we've seen? Everything, when I went back 45 years ago, was more or less local. Now, everything is global. What happens in Kuala Lumpur, what happens in Tokyo, what happens in Singapore, or the UK, or the Ukraine, impacts the whole world. We saw just, 6 or 7 years ago, how a crisis in one money center bank, or one set of money center banks, pushed the whole world almost into a depression, very close to that. And now we have corporations that have hundreds of thousands of employees, and they do business in 100+ countries. How does any one nation control these super corporations? As a matter of fact, I just saw Obama had his radio address yesterday, and he was talking about, he was demeaning or berating some of the major U.S. corporations because they were taking some of their operations offshore to avoid paying U.S. taxes. No kidding, right? These are global entities, and where do they do their business, and where do they set up their operations and their headquarters for tax purposes? Where it's going to cost them the least money. So they're not even, the ability of any one country to control these super corporations is becoming diminished and smaller and smaller. So how do we project ourselves in the future? Are we going to become citizens of Citigroup, citizens of Microsoft, citizens of General Motors? Where does our allegiance lie? As a matter of fact, I saw a documentary about 6 or 7 months ago where they were talking about the professional of the future. And the professional of the future working in a corporate environment didn't even have an apartment or a residence. They went from one corporate setting to another. So they spent 3 months in Tokyo living in a corporate apartment. From there they went to London. From there they went to Beijing, to New York. And they just moved around the world because that's where their corporate environments were. So more and more what we are seeing is that the economic forces that are in play are diminishing political boundaries. European boundaries have now almost becoming secondary to the European Union. We have NAFTA. They have the Asian associations, the Southeast Asian Trade Association, etc. We're regionalizing, and perhaps as we go into the future, your future, political entities, political concepts that we have now of nations will be less and less important. What does that mean to your future? And what challenges and opportunities does that present to you? The third one, the environment. You know, we hear about this, but you know, right now, we hear about it and some of us are getting excited about it or nervous about it, but this is a reality. The environment is changing. As a matter of fact, some of the projections, and these are realistic projections, and these are not fanciful ones, are projecting that major portions of the Earth as we know it today, as we proceed to the 22nd century, will be uninhabitable, including New York City. This can be underwater. New York, London, Paris, major cities, major centers in the central part, in the center of the world, will be uninhabitable. What does that mean? Matter of fact, some of the projections are that as we progress again to the 22nd century, the most valuable land and where you will see the most development will be in Antarctica. The Arctic ice cap is melting, so they're projecting that areas of northern Canada will be seafront, beachfront properties. So what does this mean as we look at the future of the world and we see the dramatic changes that are changing the environment? And you can see it right here. I mean, we're sitting here in Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan was hit by Hurricane Sandy just 2 years ago. And it wiped out most of the major office buildings here because they had all of their air conditioning power plants in the basements that were all flooded out and they were out of operation for 6 months or so. If you came down here for months and months and months after Hurricane Sandy, what you saw in the streets were generators that were trying to give power into the buildings here because they couldn't operate. And that was one storm that hit New York, one storm. So what is the impact on the environment as we progress through the future? The fourth one is population. The world population today stands at 7 trillion people. 7 billion people. 7 trillion. 7 billion people. 7 billion people. Now, if you just look back maybe, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years ago, it was around 4 or 5. Now we're at 7. The projections are that that will continue to climb to about the midpoint of this century, and it'll start to level off at about 9 billion people. That's 2 billion people more than we have in the world today. Now, if I couple that with some of the environmental changes that we're having, how do we take care of these people? How do we feed them? How do we get them water? Matter of fact, some of the projections are, as we move into the future, that water will be much more valuable than oil, and that people will be fighting water over oil. I just saw last night that a documentary that CNN had on the city of the future, where they're talking about the major drought that Los Angeles is facing right now, and the threat of Los Angeles running out of water. And now they got this massive $1 billion desalination plant that they're hoping to bring online in a few years to help alleviate that. But what will this mass of people, what changes will that impact into the world, in a world where we may be losing significant parts of our habitat? So how do we deal with the population problem? Population. And then if I couple that with the next one, human rights, as I see people increasing and the demands on them, but I also see as people are increasing, although there are forces that are trying to unify the world, there's also this growing intolerance. This growing, it seems like, polarization of people, and where we are seeing groups that are nations amassing significant power. We see it in the Middle East right now, the things that are going on in the Middle East. Hamas, not a country, yet look at the turmoil that it's causing. Groups that we could claim as terrorists or whatever, but there is this tug of human rights. We call them terrorists, they call them people that are claiming that they're fighting for their freedom and for their human rights. Whether it's in the Far East or in the Middle East or it's in Africa, we see wars between Tutsis and their counterparts, I forgot the name of them. But these small groups that are exerting small power of intolerance in this world of increasing population and increasing polarization in an environment that is shrinking. So you get a glimpse, if you put all 5 of these together, you kind of get a glimpse of the forces that are creating this future world. And if you just project the implications of these forces, you see a world that is so significantly different than it is today. Now, I can't say what it's going to be. I don't know. I don't know which of these forces, or someone that we can't even identify right now, will have the most dramatic impact on your future. But I can tell you that they will, and that some that are unforeseen now will change that world. So many years ago, I'm going to close with one statement here. Many, many years ago, I went to a conference, and it was given by some faculty at Harvard University. And the whole concept, this was a business conference, was how you had to understand change. And as you were approaching your business, not to orient your business to the things that you saw today, but to orient your business to what you projected in the future. Because understanding where things were going was much more important than just trying to react to where the world is today. And they gave an example of the samurai in Japan, and saying how the samurai class in Japan for hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 years, ruled Japan. And they ruled Japan in a culture and an environment that dictated how they acted and what their power base was. But the samurai didn't see the changes that were happening in the early part of the 20th century. And as a class, they were eliminated as part of the power base because they failed to see the changes that were taking place in the world. And the lesson of that at the end of this conference was, and the mantra that they gave us to take away from that conference was, don't be a samurai. Don't be a samurai. So my advice to you, my path of all of this is, don't be a samurai. Understand the forces that are going to be creating your world and try to take hold of them and try to in some way impact them. Try to make a difference, not in the world that you see today, with the forces that you see playing out today, but in the world in the forces that will be impacting the world as we go through into the 2020s, 30s, 40s, 50s, until you reach my age in the 2060s. In some ways, I envy you. I wish I could see the world that you will see when you're in the 2060s. In some way, I'm nervous about you, and I'm a little bit apprehensive about the world that you will see. But whatever that world is, it's yours. And it's yours to help make it, and it's yours to live in. So good luck to all of these, and I'll turn it back to Jen. Well, questions?
Now that Mike's got us thinking about where the world is at today and the reality, I hope that stimulated your minds to think about what, some of the questions. And we have a couple of questions. We have a couple of minutes for questions. Whoever has a question for Mike, please raise your hand.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. Thanks for the presentation. I have some curiosity about, how you feel the technology will develop with the technologies that it takes to produce the technologies, right? Like, so there's always like the capability of industry to meet the trajectory of the industry.
So we're seeing now, right, as you look at the technology as it is today, we're seeing the beginnings of thinking machines. I don't know how many of you know Watson. Have you any of you heard of Watson? Where IBM created the machine to play Jeopardy, and it actually beat all the prior Jeopardy champions. So we start coupling that with virtual reality. We start coupling that with voice recognition and the abilities of computers now to think creatively. They'll start designing their own machines. So, and there is a wonderful opportunity in that, in relieving humans and humanity from all the laborious things that we do right now. But there's also a danger in that. Where does that end as you project that forward? Is there some point where that becomes more of a risk and a danger than it is a benefit? And I don't know the answer to that. You can see it going either way. Right. But whatever way it's going, as we go into the future, technology will be dominating our worlds with self-driving cars, self-create. I mean, it's all already in the works.
It's like the technology will be a benefit to technology, but not necessarily a benefit to humanity.
To humanity, I don't know. It certainly is going to create new paradigms. All these forces will create new paradigms. What those new paradigms are, are yet to be determined, but they will be different.
Thank you.
Thank you.